YouTube is ready. Thank you. Morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Councillor Mike Quigley, Chairman of the Planning and Rights of Way Committee. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting, which is both taking place here in the Council Chamber and is being broadcast live on YouTube. Somebody got a feedback there. I don't know where that's coming from. Sorry about that. Item number 1 is minutes of the last meeting. The draft minutes of the last meeting held on 12th of March are included as item 1 on the agenda. Can we agree that they are a true record of that meeting, please? Anyone content? That's unanimous, thank you. Apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
We have received apologies from Councillor Nigel Moxon on other council business, and Councillor Chris Barnfather is substituting. And we have also received apologies from Councillor Rachel Madden. We do have a substitute arranged, Councillor John Wilmot, but he is not present yet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. Do we have any declarations of interest by members or officers on any items on the agenda today?
Thank you, Chairman. Item number 1 question echo here, isn't there? I'll sit back a bit further, see if that helps at all. And item 5, as the report says, most of the application side is with my division of West Bridgeford West. I don't intend to let this committee know my decision on voting, but I will be asking questions, as you'll discover a bit later on. This is a very tricky one for me as a member of a division member of West Bridgeford West, but we'll come on to that a bit later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Any other members? No. Any officers? No. Agenda item 4 then. Do any members present have any instances of lobbying to declare? There's none that I've been advised of up to date. Does anybody? Councillor Owen?
Yes, I've had an email from a Mr. Jager about this particular application.
Councillor Owen, did you respond or engage in a conversation with Mr. Jagger?
No, I just read it.
Fine. Councillor Wheeler?
Understandably, Chairman, there are groups, including one here to this morning, who will be speaking here, who have contacted me. I am the divisional member there, so that's not surprising at all. I haven't engaged in any correspondence apart from actually suggesting to the groups that they should come through the formal route, which is what I think one of the groups has already done. I don't know about the other group. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. We'll move on then to the substantive item, agenda item 5, which is the application for the spreading of waste topsoil on land west of Sharp Hill Wood with post-development for continuing agricultural use, land west of Sharp Hill Wood, Ed Walton. Can I move the recommendations set out in the report? And a seconder.
Formally second, reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Joel, I think this one's yours.
Thank you. Good morning. This is an application relating to the spreading of waste topsoils on agricultural land west of Sharp Hill Wood, Ed Walton. The key issues are around the management of waste, impacts to right of way, and the use of land in the greenbelt. The site in question is 27.9 hectares, currently under arable use within the greenbelt. There are residential properties on the edge of Ed Walton to the north. To the east, we've got Sharp Hill Wood Local Wildlife Site and Nature Reserve. Beyond that is the ongoing development at the land west of Melton Road Sustainable Urban Extension, or SUE. And then we've got Wilford Cemetery to the west and the A52 to the south. So broadly on that plan there shows you the context. So we take you a little tour around the site. The land here is elevated at the centre, falls away generally to the north and the south. There are 4 fields separated by very fragmented hedgerows. There's also a small pond. So looking generally around the site now on the photographs shows the nature of the open fields and the hedgerows. There is also an electricity line that runs along the western boundary as well. So there's several public footpaths also traversing these fields. They're very well used. That's the pond. The proposal involves overland importation of topsoils which are located within the SUE to the northeast, and this will be undertaken with two-phase spreading process utilising appropriate mobile plant to spread the soils over the land over roughly a 6-week operational period. The working hours would align with the adjacent housing construction, so Monday to Friday, 7:30 till 7, and Saturdays 8 till 1:30, with no working on Sundays or bank holidays. Surface waters during the construction process would be managed by creating a temporary bund on the northeastern boundary behind properties on Peveril Drive, which is the blue line on that plan on the right there, which I think, Jonathan, you've got, haven't you? Thank you. The public rights of way in this area, as I say, are very, very well used. The applicant proposes to manage the disruption by keeping footpath 26 open at all times and by employing a managed crossing point where the dump trucks would enter from the east. The temporary closures to the footpaths would be required to the 2 footpaths that run east-west. They are 27 and 28. There would be a diversionary route maintaining connectivity around the site, and that's around the northern boundary of the site there. Once the works have been completed, the land would be returned back immediately to its agricultural use. Most notable in the proposal is that it would negate the need for any associated HGV movements to move these materials. The consultation responses show that no objections have been received by the Borough Council, the Environment Agency, Natural England, or other technical consultees. There have been some concerns raised by the county's ecologist, which we'll touch on shortly. Local objections, however, have been received from 5 residents, including issues relating to flooding, impacts to rights of way, habitat damage, and concerns about soil quality. We've also received 2 detailed letters of objection from the Friends of Sharp Hill Woods, one from the Nottinghamshire Ramblers, and 1 late letter of representation has been received from the Sharp Hill Action Group after the committee report had been sent through for publication. So that's not covered in the report, but I'm going to just cover the points very briefly now. So the points that the Action Group raise relate to the disruption to the rights of way, which we've covered in the report, the lack of management plan to contain surface water runoff, difficulty in spreading the soils evenly, leading to increasing gradients on the public footpaths. We've considered that in the report. Impacts on wildlife, impacts on soil spreading, on the wider landscaping scheme that is required on this land, whether the soils are suitable for agricultural use, and the scheme not securing gains for biodiversity, which we'll come on to in a moment because we are securing that, looking to secure that. The representation states the main issue is the surface water runoff resulting from the slope of the land and also from the adjacent housing developer. The objection states that they don't believe that the rate of runoff would remain unchanged and that there would be an increased flood risk. And so there is concern there for the residents that could be affected there. And they say that the proposed bund should be made permanent and longer to mitigate that impact. Again, we'll cover that briefly, but it is in the report and we don't believe further mitigation is required on that point. So in terms of our assessment, we've assessed the application against the planning policy and the adopted and the emerging Waste Local Plan and National Planning Policy. the utilisation of greenfield sites for inert waste disposal it is least preferable under the waste core strategy. That gives priority to restoring former mineral sites and despoiled land. However, the proximity principle here is considered a key material consideration, in that this proposal would negate any HGV movements and associated emissions, which would otherwise be required to transport this material to disposal sites further afield. So this isn't the green belt, as I said earlier on. Most development in the green belt is classed as inappropriate. However, the MPPF makes a number of exceptions, including for engineering operations. Whilst this is a form of waste disposal, it is also through the mechanism of an engineering operation. For the purposes of a green belt policy, it is considered to fall within the exception of being an engineering operation. And after the works have been completed, they will preserve the openness of this site in the green belt. The raising of land is roughly 100 to 200 millimetres across the site. It will be imperceptible on that landform. Whilst it's not clear whether the soils would actually enhance the agricultural potential of these fields, the farmer is the joint applicant in this case, and the soils have come from the same area and are the same character, and they've been tested and clean. They are clean and suitable for the use on this land. The limited disruption to the public rights of way it is acknowledged. They would be safely fenced off. There is a diversion planned, which is adequate. The closure does require a separate legal order, which the applicant is pursuing. So in terms of the other concern about runoff, we do have some photos of this. So from Peveril Drive, which is to the north of the site, there is a pre-existing runoff, and noted on the photos here. We've discussed this with colleagues in highways and with our flood risk team, and they are no longer objecting to the application. The short-term nature of the works, it can be mitigated, and we brought it to the attention of the highways officers, and they've been out and had a look at the site, and there's potentially an enforcement matter here for them to deal with separately. However, the mitigation for the purposes of the application includes that bund, which has been accepted by the consultees. Briefly then, in other points, the short-term disruption to noise and dust can be managed. Conditions are recommended to govern that. There are ecology conditions that are recommended as well. We don't believe there are going to be any negative impacts to the Sharp Hill Wood Local Nature Reserve. Most of the actual application site is devoid of any interest in terms of its natural features. The area to the north of the site is already subject to requirements for landscape improvements as part of the adjacent housing development. Therefore, we've looked at the southern-facing fields as an area where hedgerow enhancements could be looked at as a gain. There is an in-principle agreement with the applicant to deliver a package of ecological and landscape enhancements to those hedgerows that are in a very poor state, should planning permission be granted. Finally, the actual release of this material from the land next door will enable the completion of that development to take place, including the delivery of a community park and a pavilion on that land adjacent to the northeast. Overall, the applicant has sought to minimise all the environmental impacts, and we consider the proposal is largely in accordance with the development plan, and that there are important material considerations also in support, and we therefore recommend that planning permission is granted subject to the conditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel. Member of the public has asked to address the committee in relation to this application. I remind the representatives may speak for a maximum of 3 minutes and will be advised when a minute of time available remains. When the time limit has been reached, the speaker must stop immediately, and speakers should not introduce any new material beyond that already submitted as part of the application or raised by officers as a further relevant information in their presentation of the report. I now invite Richard Elliott to speak on behalf of the community group known as the Friends of Sharp Hill Wood.
Good morning all. We have read the officer report and its recommendations. We urge the committee to overturn these recommendations and reject this planning application, which supports expedience and profit rather than ecological considerations. In our view, the officer report does not adequately address our concerns. In particular, the earth is misleadingly referred to as topsoil, which it is not. Even the applicant's own test data show non-compliance with the relevant British standard for topsoil. While it may contain topsoil, it's mixed with heavy clay, roadstone from a haul road constructed when stockpiling, and other contaminants. Secondly, it does not make engineering sense to add loose earth to the already challengingly steep north-facing slope. Thirdly, this is particularly because during very heavy rain, water and sediment runoff already occurs from the north-facing slope onto Peveril Drive and adjacent properties. Any increase in earth on the north-facing slope will inevitably aggravate the situation. This risk is worse because of the uncertain responsibility for the existing east-west land drain running across the at-risk area. Also, while disposal of waste in the green belt and to a greenfield agricultural site is recognised as the least favoured solution, this solution is then justified by, in our view, overstating certain claimed benefits. Much is made of reduced emissions and pollution from the avoidance of HGV journeys, yet the equivalent emissions from the estimated 1900 dump truck movements and associated bulldozer activity over the 6-week disposal period, with no enhancement or benefit to nature, the public or community, are ignored. For these reasons, we urge you to reject this planning application. However, if you grant approval, we request the following planning conditions. 1. No deposits on the north-facing slope on the grounds of its steepness and user experience of runoff across that slope onto properties and road. 2. Provisions of long-term measures for prevention of flooding onto properties and Peveril Drive, including clearing and establishing the viability of the existing land drain. Existing proposals only address the short-term risk, leaving long-term responsibility to others. In wet weather, the proposed temporary bund may create a pond, obstructing the right-of-way, which is not a desirable long-term solution. Thirdly, the ecological enhancement plan referenced in condition 14 should be submitted in advance of the works, not 3 months following completion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Do officers have anything to clarify on a factual basis on the speaker's comments?
I mean, if it's any help, the material question on the material in terms of whether it's clean or contaminated, the Borough Council Environmental Health Officer comments are in the report, and they've not objected on the basis that the materials they are clean and they are suitable. And also we have a condition recommended, number 12, which requires that any stones or other materials that shouldn't be in there are taken out to facilitate agricultural cultivation of that land once it's been spread on the land.
No, sorry. Anything else, Joel, Jonathan?
I mean, on the point on ecological enhancement, the approach that we are looking to take is that those details come in post permission. However, we have explored that initially with the applicant. There is an in principle agreement in terms of there are a number of hedgerows that can be enhanced, and that's a fairly straightforward operation that can be subject to a planning condition.
Thank you. I now throw it open to members for debate. Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chairman. As I indicated earlier on, most of the land falls in my division of West Bridgford West. I'm not going to indicate to this meeting whether I'm for or against the application, because otherwise I'd have to leave the room and I couldn't vote anyway. What I want to do is raise some questions this morning, and hopefully that's permissible, Chairman. Thank you. Firstly, let me explain why I'm going to disquiet the fact that notice went up on site for this planning meeting this morning. That's unacceptable. Basically saying that the site is going to be closed for, here it is correct, 6 months. That's rubbish, in my opinion, because all the documents refer to works for 6 weeks. So I'm factually getting this correct. I've spoken to the rights of way officer. I have not had an answer as to why that apparent error is in the documentation pinned up on site. I asked to have a reply before this meeting started this morning. I haven't had that, which is why I've been fiddling around with my phone, check whether there has been a reply or not. But I have been told verbally that notice has been removed, which is good, because we have to wait for the outcome of this meeting this morning before any no site notice can go on, whichever way it goes. That's just a factual thing, Mr. Chairman, but letting me say that. Some of the comments. As I said earlier on, I have to represent various interests as a county councillor in this division. I have to take into consideration what the alternative would be, and I think Joel's mentioned this, or he certainly touched upon it. The alternative would be HGVs trundling through, taking the soil away to the appropriate fields and sites. Not clear what route those HGVs would take. That's not in the report, but it would worry me in terms of impact upon residential developments of HGVs trundling along different routes to get rid of this, move on the topsoil. I raised that, just make that point here. I think, no, I don't think, I know there is a problem with flood risk, and something Beverly Drive was mentioned earlier on. I would ask the officers when they look at the conditions attached to this to look very carefully and with some sympathy on what's been said, because it impacts on people's lives. And I know it does, because that's my division, and I know it well. And it straddles, of course, a further division which the councillor there may or may not be speaking on this morning. We talk about enforcement, Joe. I come across enforcement more times than possibly ever hot dinners. It's very difficult sometimes to make certain that applicants do what's been said in the conditions and carry out enforcement activities. Again, I'm asking you please to look at that very carefully, strengthen the wording, so the requirement is on them to do what it says on the tin, not what they think they should be doing. It's extremely important, Joe. I'm sure you take into consideration, Joe. The quality of removal of stones, etc. Well, I've got a piece of land in my division where we had a very similar problem, where it was a piece of land, fortunately after a lot of hard work and great cooperation, I have to say, from the councillor in question and also from officers. That piece of land has now been turned into recreational use, albeit on a temporary basis, because further down the line there is provision for a further school to go on that site if required. The reason I mentioned that, removal of stones sounds very simple, it ain't. I've had nothing but horrendous battles with various variety of people to get rid of the stones, because it is not acceptable. So could we look at them again to try and tighten that one up, whether it's by hand picking or some other ways of getting rid of these stones, sifting the stones, not leaving them there. It is extremely important. Chairman, I've probably said enough for the time being. As I said earlier on, I'm not going to indicate to this meeting how I'm going to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Anyone else wish to comment or? Councillor Owen.
Chairman, thank you. I'm not unhappy with the principles behind the application. I think it's a sensible way forward by and large. I think the objections regarding the footpaths are somewhat trivial, I have to say. My understanding is, and I'm sure officers will correct me if I'm wrong, the footpaths are going to be closed or diverted for a period of 6 weeks. Well, if that's the case, so be it. Yes, it's inconvenient. When I drove into County Hall this morning, there are roadworks on the ring road where I got held up. That was inconvenient, but presumably the work had got to be done. And yes, I cursed like anything, as no doubt the walkers on these footpaths will curse like anything, or perhaps they're much more refined than me in Rushcliffe, I don't know. But nevertheless, yes, it's inconvenient, but it's not the end of the work, for goodness sake. But the one thing that really does trouble me a little is the issue of potential flooding. And I don't think that that has been addressed as fully as I would like to see in the report. We've heard of a temporary bund which will deal with some of the issues. And my initial thought was, well, why can't that be made permanent? But the objectors don't want it for some reason to be made permanent. That would seem to me to be a sensible solution, but still, there we are. And we've had reports of current runoff from the site, and we were shown photographs, and I did feel that Mr. Marshall rather, I won't say swept it under the carpet, rather glossed over the issues that were arising. You've had talks with County Highways, and they could see no wrong. They could find no problems whatsoever. Well, sitting on a Borough Council Planning Committee, that's a familiar mantra that I hear. They could find nothing wrong. Yet we could see from the photographs that there was already a lot of sludge there on the road. And I would endorse Councillor Wheeler's comments when it comes to enforcement. Prevention is far better than an attempt to cure through enforcement. It's very rare that you get rigorous enforcement and an appropriate outcome. So the idea is to stop it in the first place. I look on page 32 and paragraph 134 at the end of there. It's not clear whether the particular example is stemmed from the current construction site for the zoo or the agricultural fields that are subject to the current application, but it is understood the adjacent developer has put place measures to address this. That's flooding. Well, I want to be certain. I don't want an understanding that that's been done. I want a degree, well, I want more than a degree. I want absolute certainty that something has been done about that. And we go through from from paragraph 135 about the risk of flooding. And we're told at some point, and I just can't put my finger on it, but I know I've read it, that there's going to be a flood management plan drawn up. Now, I would have thought that flood management plan, and I think again Councillor Wheeler touched on this, that flood management plan ought to have been in place so that we know exactly what it is before planning permission is granted. And I would suggest that that planning permission is not granted until we have a satisfactory flood plan in place, because that's the real concern. That's the tangible concern of residents. The other stuff, to my mind, is superficial and peripheral, and it's just the way things need to be in order to get this sorted out. But the issue of flooding is a real one, and I have real concerns, and I want reassurances that that issue of potential flooding or actual flooding, as we've seen going on, is going to be dealt with, or will be dealt with effectively, if planning permission were to be given. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barnfather.
I wonder, Chair, if we could hear the response from officers before I speak. Some of the points that have been raised by Councillor Owen, I also wish to raise, and it may be that Mr. Marshall can address those before I speak.
Certainly, yes. In terms of the flooding and the drainage. Apologies if we did skip over that. There was a lot to cover in the presentation. To confirm that the Highway Office comments in the report acknowledge that they're aware of the pre-existing situation, and it has been inspected, and there is a potential issue that they can take up with the landowner there separately. There's a clause in the Highways Act that there shouldn't be discharge of water to the highway, and so that is a separate issue for the Highways Authority to take up, and they say they are aware of that. In terms of the proposal, the mitigation is that bund that we showed on that plan in the north corner of the site. However, there is a residual risk there again, and the highway comment in the report requests that additional measures be implemented to mitigate the potential for that continuing discharge into Peveril Drive. That forms the basis of recommended condition 6, which requires, amongst other matters, prior to the importation of materials, measures to prevent unregulated discharge of surface water into the public highway. So those details currently are recommended to be required prior to importation of works under condition 6. In terms of whether the bund could be made permanent, I think that will be something that perhaps needs further discussion with highways and with the landowner and our rights of way officers. However, the objective here is to mitigate the impact of the runoff from when the soil is put on the land and before it's got, as it's fresh, to stop that washing down. And it should, with agricultural cultivation, become part of the fields in short time. They were the main points, I think. I think you mentioned, Councillor Owen, the public footpaths, but I don't think I've got any further to add on that. Does that help, members?
Thank you, Joel. Jazz wants to say a few things.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. I just thought it would be useful for me just to interject on some of the framework within which you're making this decision today. So, firstly, a planning permission in and of itself cannot be required to correct a pre-existing problem. It's required to not make a pre-existing problem any worse. So that's the standpoint in terms of what you're being asked to look at today. In terms of the point raised about whether whether the flood risk discharge condition referred to by Joel should be in place before the management plan should be in place before the decision is made. Again, I'd like to just remind members that you're advised to use conditions to make what would otherwise be an unacceptable acceptable. There isn't a condition in front of you today that adequately can control the matter. And as other members have alluded today, some of this would be effectively an issue in relation to the enforcement rather than the terms of any condition in and of itself. So the condition suggested to you today can adequately control the proposed or any excess discharge. So I'd just like you to remember that when you're making a decision today. And again, just to reiterate, a planning permission cannot be required to correct pre-existing issues. So the question is, does this make the situation any worse? And if it can do, is that adequately controlled? Thank you.
Thank you, Jess, for that clarification. Councillor Barnfather.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Marshall, for your clarifications as well. I just had a few observations from the documentation prior to presentations around footpaths. Were they footpaths by virtue of use, or were they on the definitive map? And I think the answer is they're on the definitive map and they are well used. But I note that the mitigation there is that we are talking about a 6-week period, which in the scheme of things is relatively insignificant. I had questions about the level that was being raised, because obviously you look at the volume of topsoil here and it's considerable, but it's over a very large area. And the figures that I think were given by Mr. Marshall, 100 to 200 millimetres across the entire site, and effectively maintaining the topography as virtually as it is, satisfied me in that sense. The runoff, obviously, as Councillor Owen alluded to, was a concern. Well, I think condition 6 makes it very clear that the authority will have to sign off on any management plan in relation to runoff from that site prior to any works commencing. So I think the condition in itself deals with that as an issue. I had concerns about the impact, obviously, on the quality of the soil. I think officers, again, have addressed that in relation to removal of any detrimental materials from the soil as best as can be achieved. And I note the fact that the farmer who will intend to cultivate this land afterwards is, I think, the joint applicant in relation to this. So one assumes as a farmer he is not going to want a lot of rubbish imported onto his land, which would ultimately affect the quality of any crops that he may wish to grow. I note the benefit, considerable benefit, of the fact that we're not going to have HGV movement. I note the objector's comments that there will still obviously be discharge of exhaust fumes into the atmosphere by virtue of dumper trucks, but they are contained to a small site rather than the impact on the greater highway network by significant numbers of HGV vehicles leaving and entering the site and moving to who knows where in order to use an alternative site. I get from officers that there's no impact on the wood itself envisaged from this approval, should it be granted, which is reassuring. The timescales are extremely limited, as I've already alluded to, so I have to say, in my opinion, I do feel that the overall benefits from this application considerably outweigh any possible detrimental impact. So I will be supporting the application.
Thank you, Councillor Barnfather. Any further comments, observations from members? No? In that case, I will move to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendations, please indicate. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. That concludes the item, and as the majority are in favour of the recommendation, then it is approved by a majority of the voting members. I therefore declare the application passed. We move on then to agenda item 9 on the agenda, and it's the regular development management progress report. And I invite Jonathan Smith to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the usual report we bring to members. Appendix A highlights the applications received and those determined since the last report to members on the 12th of March. Appendix C sets out the committee's future work programme for forthcoming meetings, so you can see the applications that are due to come to committee in the near future. And if I may, Chair, take the opportunity just to say that today's meeting, even though he's not taking a particularly active part, today's meeting is going to be the last meeting that David, who's sat behind us, will be with us, as Dave is going to be retiring in June. So I'd just like to place on record my thanks for all his hard work in supporting both us as officers and you as members through the many applications that Dave has dealt with over the years, and wish him all the best for a happy retirement.
Enjoy your retirement, David. You'll probably find something else to do, no doubt. Do the committee have any comments or questions regarding Jonathan's report? No? In that case, there being no further business, I bring this meeting to a close and thank you for your time and participation today.